Yeah.
And I could go on. I haven't been in the classroom for like 7 weeks, so I got to warn you.
I'm free all
Ocean
afternoon.
backed up here.
That's fantastic. Well, speaking very practically for a moment, when it comes to fathers leading their families in prayer, I'm of the opinion that I often say to parents when they're talking about leading their families in prayer that they might have to lower the expectations they have as far as how prayer ought to look with kids. I remember after I got married, we had a few kids. You just have this kind of vague idea of how Scott and Kimberly Hahn probably pray with their kids. They're all levitating or something. Meanwhile, I'm trying to not strangle my children with the rosary we're praying, and I'm not sure how to make this work. And for me, it took a while to realize that it's kind of more important to do this as a family. I want my children to enjoy this time of prayer. I don't want to be so strict. I don't want to impose how I think family prayer ought to look upon them such that they end up not wanting to pray at all. What would your advice be in that regard?
Well, I mean, all I can really advise is sort of the lessons that I learned over the years of parenting our 6 kids. And most of those lessons, quite frankly, were learned from all of the mistakes that I made and all the times that I didn't listen to Kimberly. Mm-hmm. But, what we did, because we homeschooled, was to gather as a family for morning prayer. And to this day, we still do the morning offering, the act of consecration together whenever we can. And then we would also then read at least the gospel for the day that would be read in the Mass.
That's great.
And then we would also pick up on the saint for the day. And we had different books over the years where we would learn about them. We also wanted to cultivate something of a mission-mindedness in our kids. And so we had an evangelical Protestant book called Operation World, which goes through like almost 200 countries that you can pray for each day. And you can read about the spiritual condition of the people. I think it's gone through 3 or 4 editions. I would still encourage people to use it. I remember we were praying for Burundi when the massacres occurred, and Rwanda as well. It was God's providence that we were hearing in the news about the tens of thousands of lives that were lost. And to find out that so many of them were Catholics just intensified the prayers of our own kids.
Yeah.
And then we would we always did this. We would end by doing extemporaneous prayers.
Is this still your morning prayer?
Yeah. I mean, well, actually,
it sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it would last about 20 hours or so. More like 20 minutes.
Okay.
But we would do extemporaneous prayer beginning with the youngest, and we would encourage or coach, but we wouldn't feed them lines. And it would often be like, 2.5 broken sentences, giving thanks or whatever. And then we would end with the oldest, with mom and then dad.
That's good.
And I would gather them in what we call the Holy Family Huddle, and just say the blessing over them in the morning like I would do in the evening like I did just a few hours
beautiful.
ago. Holy water too.
So I'm trying to think, if people want to kind of implement this, is this something you would do, say, before breakfast? Did you tell the kids, we all do this before we eat so that you stayed true to it, or how did it work?
That was one of my mistakes. Yes, I did stipulate that. Kimberly shook her head. I didn't realize how right she was. And so we had a lot of hangry kids and parents, so we ended up doing it after breakfast when the flesh was subdued a little bit. And so we have it, but I would say one size doesn't fit all.
Right. That's important.
If you can get 3 minutes, that's better than nothing.
Yes.
And if you can stretch it into 4 after a month or so, or if you start off with 10 and you've overdone it, learn from your mistake and go back to 5 minutes, whatever the traffic will bear,
That's good. It's
do
more
it as a couple.
It's more important to do this habitually than to have a burst of enthusiasm. Say we're going to pray, 3 mysteries of the Rosary in the morning, say,
right.
And only lasts for a couple of days.
But don't overdo it. Yeah. And I would say also, if you do it for a few days and then for whatever reasons or excuses you miss it for a few days, don't give in to feeling defeated. Just pick yourself back up again, because we did end up, whether it was vacation or when I was gone or Kimberly was busy, we might go a few days without it, or we might do it for 2 days, skip a day, and then do it for 3 or whatever. But I mean, it's just one of those things where you make the resolution, and, there were times where I almost strangled my kids with the Rosary,
That makes me glad to hear. Yeah. I probably shouldn't be glad about that, but I'm glad you're human. Yeah.
I should also mention too that I imposed the family Rosary for a while, and Kimberly, shook her head, and
Oh,
she said,
it's so good for people to
after
hear.
dinner decade. We did an after dinner decade.
Scott, that
And
is
I
so
remember
good
when
to hear.
John Paul called for the Year of the Rosary, Kimberly kind of initiated, well, why don't we at least try it as a family? And the kids had come of age, where it was mostly a positive experience. I mean, for me, the Rosary is like my favorite.
Yes.
For the kids, it's not even in the top 10.
Yes, that's very
because
good.
nobody ever imposed it on me.
No, this is so terrific. It's so important, I think, that we all be real about this, because we can have these idealized views of prayer, and I think sometimes our temperaments come into play here too. I tend to be of a melancholic disposition, so I'm very idealistic. I want prayer to look a certain way, to feel a certain way. But I think we've got to get over some of that, and it's more important to be loving and consistent. You mentioned praying with your wife. What's that like? How have you grown in that since you got married?
Yeah, I mean, prayer with her is so natural. We don't have a time that's stipulated on the schedule. We usually pray at night. We also pray together as a family, and then when the kids are gone, we often go through the Magnificat together and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I would also say that a lesson I learned from Kimberly, not only for us as a couple, but for us as a family, and that is you've got to play with your kids as much as you pray with them or more. And so
tell us why.
The importance of throwing a frisbee or a football or a baseball. I mean, since I have 5 sons and 1 daughter, she never really learned to play catch like the boys have, But ever since I was a little boy, I had a cannon for an arm, and so I try to train up my boys with the football and the baseball and the frisbee. But also, cards. I must admit, but my 5 boys have ended up, the 3 youngest especially, they've ended up being gamesters in a way I never was. I mean, they just love to play games with each other and draw me in. Kimberly and I played Moods with them like 3 nights ago, and we had a blast.
What's the game called?
It's called Moods. You can look it up and play it, and it's especially good for us melancholics. So, Matt, you will shine, I am sure, like I tend to do too. They play Risk, and they also play...
I love it. In this day and age where so many children are kind of taken in by their screens and isolated from one another, I love when kids get into board games, because it's just a beautiful excuse to sit across from each other and to enjoy each other for 20 minutes to an hour or more.
Yeah. My kids will do it for hours, sometimes hours a week. Let me think. There was another. Movies also. I didn't grow up in a time or a culture where movies were so central. Obviously, by the 80s and 90s, when our kids were born and came of age, suddenly, movies were much more dominant. I think from Star Wars on. But I was in college when the first episode of Star Wars came out. And so I'm the caboose in our family when it comes to, movie fluency. But Joe is so capable of spouting lines that he inadvertently memorized by the hundreds. And it's, it adds a lot to the humor of the dinner table conversation. One last thing, too. This is something we inherited from Kimberly's family. Never does a dinner go by where we don't eventually end up going around the table and sharing good things.
My wife is responsible for that in our household too. Yes.
Oh, and now
what's your favorite thing from today? What are the 3 best things that happened?
Yeah, it's usually 2 or 3 things. And, so far, none of us have ever levitated. And so we still have a long way to go. I'd like to say I go to confession weekly ever since I became a Catholic. And Kimberly has never suggested that I go too frequently. And the kids don't either.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here to watch the full episode. And I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and to our amazing patrons for making all of this possible. Please do us a favor before you go. Click that subscribe button and then the bell. And that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new episode.